Newsfirst.
The day that Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider, he had a choice to make. Will I use my power for good or evil? Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Let's discuss this in the context of the executive presidential system and its introduction and evolution through the decades. My guest tonight is Attorney at Law N.K. Ashokbaran. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Sonali.
Wonderful to have you on the show with us, Ashokbaran. When we look at the institutionalization and the evolution of the concept of the executive presidential system, which was brought in by then President J.R. Jayawardeneh in 1978, there has been so much melodrama surrounding it. Speak to us about the reasons back then that had existed, creating the need for this executive presidential system to be introduced.
Sonali, now when we speak of whether there was a need that existed, if you are asking whether there was a need for the country and the people, now that is a very tricky question, because in my opinion, the best constitution this country had was to a certain extent the Salisbury Constitution. Why I say that is, as a draft, as a constitutional draft, it was complete, it was wholesome. The only thing perhaps that was lacking in that piece of constitution was a Bill of Rights. Except for a Bill of Rights, it was a classic Westminster style parliamentary democracy implementing constitution. Why I say that is because under Salisbury Constitution it was all about institutions, empowering democratic institutions. It was not about individuals. It was not a constitution which was empowering one particular organ which could be run by one person, and the power is vested on them. So it was trying to establish a system of governance. And it worked very well. It worked very well until the motivations for something more domestic came through in the 1970s, when the United Front government led by Sirimava Bandaranaike wanted to cut off the continuation of the British Empire, the connections to British Empire. So they came up with this very creative doctrine of autochthonous constitution and homegrown, where they sat outside the parliament as a constituent assembly and came up with a constitution. Now that became the first Republican Constitution. The problem with the first Republican Constitution, as far as I see, is that it concentrates power on the National State Assembly. So the legislature becomes the most powerful organ within the state. So the checks and balances are not there. So this gives more and more power to one organ over the others. Now, there were instances where the state assembly had issues with the judiciary then, like a tug of war which was going on. However, even then the head of the state was a constitutional figurehead, like under the Salisbury Constitution, who can be neutral because who was apolitical, was independent, and the role was supposed to be independent, no direct powers, acted in the advice of the Prime Minister, like in the classic Westminster system. So even then, the head of the state was a figurehead. Now that has its advantages, because you have a head of the state, because head of the state does a lot of ceremonial activities, ceremonial functions rather, and the figurehead is also the head of the armed forces. So in that sense, when such a head of state is apolitical and independent, it has its own advantages. And also when, say, there are issues or tussles between different organs of the government, there is someone neutral there who can bring those two together, sit and discuss and try to resolve matters. So the system before Sri Lanka transformed into a executive presidency system worked very well for Sri Lanka. So I would not say there was a need per se, because it definitely worked and it works for other countries. I mean, let's forget the West. Let's look our neighbor, India. Are we to say that the Indian Prime Minister is not a powerful person? And it worked very well for Singapore. Singapore didn't have, I mean, this is what where we get confused. To be Lee Kuan Yew, you don't have to be an executive president.
Right.
So it works very well for many other countries, and it's working very well as well. So the need, of course, in my opinion, how I see history, from my understanding of the history, is that J.R. Jayawardena wanted it, and he thought that is the way forward, that is the way this country could be taken forward, where the power is vested with one person, like a monarch maybe. And it is in that ethos we see that later executive presidents being hailed as Maharajanani, and that kind of thinking is coming in. So if you ask me whether there was a political need or need among the people for an executive presidency, no, but there was an individual political need for J.R. Jayawardena and his allies, and it was his vision. He thought this is the way forward for the country, and he brought that in. So it was not a people-led movement.
So from 1978 to present day Sri Lanka, we've seen this conversation surrounding the executive presidency and its abolition, its limitation, so many times, time and time again. The 17th Amendment limited the powers, 18th Amendment brought it back. 19th Amendment limited the powers, 20th Amendment brought it back. 21st Amendment, which is now what we're talking about, brought back the limits. And throughout the past few decades, we've seen presidents, political leaders coming into the fore with this one promise: I will abolish the executive presidency, appoint me, pick me. And nothing has materialized thus far. So what is this love-hate relationship we have with the executive presidency, and why can't we get rid of it? Why must we get rid of it?
Well, first I will answer about people promising, and then why must we, and then I will come to why can't we.
Sure.
So if my memory serves well, I think former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga came with an abolition promise. Then the United National Party led by Ranil Wickremesinghe also came up with abolition proposals. Then Maithripala Sirisena in 2015 came up with abolition promises. Then the Janata Vimukti Peramuna came up with even a constitutional amendment proposal to abolish the executive presidency. Then, of course, this the Balavega, the Sajit Premadasas, they also, I believe, came up with a proposal to abolish executive presidency. So if we look at it, except for J.R. Jayawardena, Ranasinghe Premadasa, and maybe in between the step-in President Dingribanda Wijetunga and Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, everyone else had proposed the abolition of executive presidency. Interestingly, during the times of Dingribanda Wijetunga, when UNP lost the parliamentary power after he became the president, he took a step back. He acted for that short period until Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga won the next presidential election. He only acted as a figurehead president. He let the government carry on. So all these prominent parties and leaders have made this promise to abolish, and they have gained a lot of support from the people for that call, which means the people of Sri Lanka to a greater extent want the executive presidency abolished. It's that no president thus far had gone for the referendum to see the actual opinion, but I am confident, looking at this track record where everyone who is proposing this, or at least most who propose this, have received a positive support from the people. That could be interpreted as the people's wish for abolition.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, why must? Now, you started with Peter Parker, so let me go to Lord Acton. Mm-hmm. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the fundamental problem in our executive presidency, and we can see how executive presidency had transformed the political culture in this country into a culture of political impunity and political opportunism and of course corruption. Because you are appointing a person who I believe there is this common small talk where JR once said that except for turning a man into a woman, he has all other power. I mean, if he was in this generation, he would not have said that also. But nevertheless, it's that powerful. Mm-hmm. It's that powerful because you're concentrating all the power into one person. And that person has very little checks and balances in exercising his power. And he exerts control over everything in this country. That is the problem. So that bred a culture of impunity. Now earlier there were the crossovers, changing party allegiances, were not as common as it was after the executive presidency, because here you have a powerful executive who is trying to lure people in the legislature and trying to control the legislature, and through the executive's power to make appointments, he's controlling every aspect of administration. And the executive's power for appointments can control indirectly the judiciary as well. This is exactly why there was huge cry for limiting the president's power, and we saw through the 17th Amendment a limit for these president's power of appointing people, especially at the higher posts, were introduced, and the Constitutional Council mechanism came into play. But since then, as you correctly pointed out, it was like a ping-pong game. Right? One government comes, they say, okay, we are introducing the limitation. Next government comes, when they have the two-third majority, they say, no, we are abolishing that. Then people vote for the other side. Other side comes, brings the limitation again. Then for some reason the people vote for the other side. So it has been a ping-pong game. So this limitation game, whether it resolves the fundamental issue, if you ask me, I would say no.
All right.
It's only a temporary treatment.
Okay. We go in for a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. We're in conversation with attorney at law NK Ashokbaran. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
The farmers.
Face to Face, Newsfirst political talk show, Monday to Friday at 8 p.m. on TV1. Streaming live on Newsfirst YouTube and Facebook channels.
Inflation, exchange rates, and the rise and fall of the stock market. Bringing you insights into the business world. Watch the Business Buzz every Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
Budget tells us what we can't afford, but it doesn't keep us from buying it.
President Wickremesinghe as Finance Minister has delivered this budget under extremely difficult circumstances. The macroeconomic environment is very challenging, tough, and unforgiving.
Basically, this is not in relation to increase of taxes. This is not in relation to the reduction of taxes. This budget is all about collection of the taxes.
The path forward for 2024 are we seeing a sustainable recovery or an unsustainable recovery?
Have we learned nothing from our past? When you present budget, it's only a passing of phases that you would see.
Face the Nation, Wednesday nights at 9:30 on TV1.
TV1. TV for life.
Did a meeting take place between Sajid Premadasa, Indian High Commissioner, and Roshan Ranasinghe? Roshan, who was sacked from his ministries, responds to allegations. CEB to make an estimated profit of over 48 billion rupees by the end of the year. Shortage of doctors leads to a closure of 40 government hospitals. Another 100 likely to be closed down. SLRC and SLBC will become a public company due to continuous losses. 50 MOH areas identified as dengue high-risk zones as dengue continues to rise.
TV1. TV for life.
The People's Platform.
We're discussing the evolution of the concept of the executive presidential system. We're here with Attorney at Law N.K. Ashokbaran. Ashokbaran, as you said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The executive arm of government has a lot of power under the present executive presidential system. And we are talking about fallible human beings who are coming into positions of unfettered almost power with their own traumas, their own unresolved issues, their own pasts. The executive is not a god. So we can't rely on this whimsical notion of the perfect political leader, which is why we need checks and balances, limits, and these are all provided for by concepts like the separation of powers, democracy, rule of law. So are these concepts limited to the Constitution? Are these limited to statute books? Why don't we see enough of this in practice? Where are we going wrong? Where are the loopholes?
I think with the introduction of executive presidency, this political culture changed in this country. Because in a parliamentary system of governance, see, let me make one thing clear. To govern, you need power. Mm-hmm. So having power is not the issue. But whether the power is checked, whether there is accountability. Now, that is the most important part. So when in a parliamentary system, the cabinet is essentially from the legislature, and they are accountable to the legislature. They are accountable to the legislature. They are not outside the legislature. So, and also in a proper Westminster system, you empower institutions, not individuals. But what had happened with the executive presidency system is, like you said, it has created an office where you install a godly man, a man with a lot of powers, or a woman with a lot of powers. And everything else functions at that person's mercy. That is the system here. Now, when I say this is akin to a monarchy, I would even look at the symbols, except for this incumbent president. Every other executive president had their own standard, own flag. Who has those things? Only monarchs. Only monarchs. So it is, in a way, I believe J.R. Jayawardena manifested himself as a monarch of this whole island. And I remember he wrote or he authored a book called The Golden Threads of History, where at the end he lists the list of monarchs that had governed parts of this island. And that list extends to King George, and it comes and it ends with him. So I think the whole idea of executive presidency, which was introduced by J.R. Jayawardena, is in a sense introducing some sort of a powerful monarch to this country. That is the problem with executive presidency. Everything is at the mercy and decision of one person, and that is not healthy. You have to have active checks and accountability to that power, and that is exactly why we have to abolish this system. Because once you give power to that one person, then everything about politics in that country surrounds that person. This is why you see as long as a person remains president, that person gets support from across the board. There is no government, there is no opposition, people cross over, and everyone tries to empower him, support him, expecting something in return. This is not only happening in political arena. This is happening throughout the administration,
right,
which is not healthy for any democracy at all. So this executive president system as a system is empowering such politicization of the whole country.
Ashokbaran, let's take the flip side of the argument. Yes. Swift decision making is needed. So the argument of political expediency. Sometimes a country needs to take decisions very expeditiously, and at moments such as those, a strong, powerful leader with lots of power is required. What do you have to say to that?
Yes, Sonali. There are certain situations where you have to take a decision urgently. For example, say there is an immediate war. There is a neighbor trying to attack us. So declaring war or peace. Say there is COVID, or there is a huge riot happening, so you have to declare curfew. Those powers, even in other democratic countries, are vested with the head of the state. There's no doubt about it. But those are limited to circumstances where they are needed. Not always. Making an appointment to a higher position need not be with the president. Why? Why is everything why should one individual be in charge of the whole executive administration unfettered? Now one might say, okay, there's a limited limits have been introduced where the president comes to the parliament and he can address questions. That is not accountability per se. That is not accountability. He can come. What if he chooses not to come?
You're advocating for a reform of this executive presidential system. But will that reform guarantee an overnight transformation of the governance landscape?
Not at all. Not at all.
Then why should we even talk about it?
That is because what happened to this country, what we are facing now, did not happen overnight either. The executive presidency came about in 1978. And it is only after 10-15 years we started to actually feel how the system is slowly getting politicized. So the whole political culture transformed over the ages. To retransform it will also take time. But we have to start it at some point. It is like this. Now I have to lose weight. That will resolve my problem. But it is not going to happen overnight. So merely because it is not going to happen overnight does not mean I should not start putting effort today itself.
Okay, but you have the will to do that. Who has the will to abolish the executive presidency?
I think the people have. Definitely, people have argument about whether a constitutional amendment abolishing the executive presidency has to go through a referendum or not. That is a constitutional debate. Nevertheless, what could be the worst decision in that? That any amendment to the constitution abolishing executive presidency must go for a referendum, must require an approval by the people of this country. And I am confident that people of this country have consistently supported and backed people, as I mentioned earlier, who had promised to abolish executive presidency. So I am confident the people of this country will definitely do that. If we don't do that, we cannot change the political culture that has infested this country. That is our problem. It is a very serious condition which is affecting this country. We can do first aid, we can do certain treatments like plastering, etc., to keep things alive. But if you want to cure, you have to do serious reform treatment.
So abolish the executive presidency and then what?
We go back to a parliamentary governance system. So then that takes away an individual controlling whole of the governance. Then our political party system will get enriched. If you think of it, look at our political parties. They do not have an individual policy identity, they have personality identity. Every political party in this country now is identified by one or two persons who are leading that party. There is no policy debate here. There is no collectivism here. It is all about individuals. Why? Tomorrow when they come to power, someone will sing Ayubo Veva Maharajanani. That is the problematic political culture this executive presidency has built. And if you want to change that, you have to start now by disassembling this system and reverting to a tried and tested system. Now, we go to a parliamentary democracy, we have a lot of examples, even our neighboring countries, which have been successful implementing that. So I don't think parliamentary democracy is in any sense disadvantageous for Sri Lanka's growth.
All right. And on that note, we wrap up. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law N.K. Ashokbaran, for joining us on this edition of the program. Thank you.
It was a pleasure joining in this program with you, Sonali. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.